We're all a little crazy. Maybe you'll say something that doesn't make a lot of sense, or look back at something you did and struggle to explain it, but like many parts of life, insanity exists on a very large scale. Psychology is my fucking jam. Never really pursued it with intentions of getting qualifications, but I can't help but be fascinated by the reasons why we do all the weird little things that make up our lives. What's even more interesting is the extreme ends of the spectrum. Minds that are warped to such an extent that there stops being such a thing as normal behavior. Sometimes it helps someone be more creative, sometimes it helps them become detached from their actions, sometimes it turns them into a full-on psychopath. In the safe haven that is video games, it almost always makes them more entertaining. As soon as pixels started resembling human beings, that's where we started writing crazies into our video games. And we've been having so much fun since. The hyper-liberal society on offer by the underwater city of Rapture in BioShock is one that allows the manipulation of both societal laws and the rules we have in place that are designed to make sure that we don't spend most of our time trying to kill each other. Pretty much acts as a twisted model city, good for seeing just what would happen, but keep that shit underwater at all costs. But even so, you can sympathise a little with what some of its residents get up to. Andrew Ryan wants a utopia that can flourish away from governmental restrictions, pretty reasonable. Sander Cohen is using his freedom to combine his art with death, a little harder to justify. And Dr. Steinman cuts people. No, stop that. Really doesn't hang about this game. End of the second level, boom, a psycho surgeon who's become so obsessed with human anatomy that he'll mutilate his patients in pursuit of making them perfect. It started as simple cosmetic surgery, but exposure to the powerful drug known as Adam led to his mind snapping like a twig and larger chunks being taken off patients. Apparently he started seeing hallucinations of Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of beauty, and I think at that stage you're probably beyond reason. I mean, I admire the dedication, and you've got to be passionate about something, but preferably something a little less stabby. Should team up with Sander Cohen, he can probably help him out with his weird sculptures. Either that or chess. Chess is good too. Boredom is a killer, or so I'm told. Most of my time is taken by making videos about video games for the internet. I barely have enough time to look after baby lambs, let alone be bored. But those people who do find themselves with nothing to do and time to kill can get pretty creative with how they entertain themselves. Or maybe they could just want to break everything in sight. You can't really put the Joker on here since he came from a non-video game source, but thankfully we have the next best thing in Jinx from League of Legends. The difference here is that the Joker usually has a wider goal behind his actions. Jinx just hates being bored and gets a lot of joy out of wrecking everything in sight. And if you were a smaller, weapon-wielding, less scaly version of Godzilla and downtown Tokyo wasn't available, you'd pick the next best thing. Namely the city of Piltover, which is the kind of perfect utopia that is ideal for a bit of chaos, with plenty of law enforcers to fuck with. Maybe it's a little shallow for some, but there's worse ways of keeping yourself entertained. There probably isn't, actually. Keep it to video games, kids. An insane bad guy isn't too much of a problem. The fact that you're opposed to their thought process and their actions is part of the reason why you're on opposite sides. But when you're on the same side, when you're having to rely on someone who's a bit crazy for help, it's a little bit disconcerting. I imagine the conversation went something like this. Hey, you know that new Zelda game's gonna be all about masks? Yeah. Well, why don't we take the shopkeeper of that mask shop from the last game that no one went to and make him aid Link on his quest? Yeah. And we should give him really angular movements so the player gets a good idea of what tone the game is going for. Yeah. Sound good? Yeah. Alright, take 5 everyone. We'll be working on what kind of dance Link will be doing once he gets that weird mask that looks like a misshaped penis when we come back. Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask might have its quirks, but in general it keeps the sanity levels reasonably consistent. Sure, the atmosphere is overall quite oppressive and you can work out pretty early on that things are a little off, but very rarely does the game take a dive off the deep end. In every scene where he shows up, the happy mask salesman steals the show. The lack of variety in his facial expressions, his angular movements, and how he seems to know much more about what's going on than any normal person should, they all add up to produce a character who almost doesn't fit within the walls of Majora's Mask. I mean, the draw of the NPCs is how convincing their reactions are to a falling, smiling moon. This is human behavior for the most part. Which is why when we have the Happy Mars salesman acting like this, we end up with such a jarring contrast. And even though we eventually find out the motives of Skull Kid, we never find out a thing about the Happy Mars salesman. Why he sells magic masks, why his movement is so jerky, why he has a mask of Mario on his back. Who's the real bad guy here? It's time for your monthly exposure to the majesty of Spec Ops for Line. Careful now, make sure you're wearing sunglasses or else you will be dazzled by the sheen coming off this work of art. For real though, it's a great game that takes on themes that are rarely touched on in this genre. For all the bravado of shooting up random soldiers, you don't see too many games tackle PTSD. A misunderstanding with horrendous consequences sees Captain Walker and his team launch a hefty amount of white phosphorus, that incendiary weapon that doesn't mix well with just about anything, over a bunch of innocent people. Probably comes as no surprise that Captain Walker doesn't take this well. No matter how much he tries to hold it together in the moment, from that point onwards, Captain Walker is a broken man. He convinces himself that sacrificing so many innocent people was justified if he can take down the man who's calling the shots, John Conrad. The final act of Spec Ops: The Line reveals that there was never a threat. The leader who was apparently controlling everyone had killed himself long before Captain Walker had set foot in Dubai. In order to defend the actions and the atrocities that he committed, Captain Walker fabricated this threat that needed stopping. It's like if you break a vase at home and try to cover it up by pretending a bear was in the house. Come the epilogue and you can choose what happens to Captain Walker when faced with a rescue. You can either shoot them or let them take you home, with the latter revealing just how bad things went for Walker.
You don't mind me asking, what was it like? How'd you survive all this?
Who said I did?
Alice's Adventures in Wonderland has been the inspiration for crazy stories for just over 150 years. And you can see why, ignoring the fact that taking a trip to Wonderland comes with all sorts of drug-taking undertones. It also acts as a unique window into the mind of a psychotic little girl. A lot of the kid-friendly tellings of the story put it down to Alice's incredibly overactive imagination being used as a means of escape, but tilt it sideways and you have visions influenced by a fractured mental state. When you go down that particular rabbit hole, you end up with something like American McGee's Alice. Here's a tip for anyone who wants to make a trailer. Leave an impression. Especially when making a sequel, you want to lead people back to where it began. The trailer I watched for Alice Madness Returns in 2011 perfectly encapsulates what this game, and indeed the previous game, is all about. In this series, Alice is a little bit older and a little more cynical, and while Wonderland is still seen as some kind of mythical land that exists only inside her head, it's a little less welcoming. At the age of 7, an accidental fire tore through her home, killing her parents and leaving Alice with survivor's guilt. At the age of 7! Stranded in an orphanage for mental patients, Wonderland is seen as the only escape. Except it's being corrupted a little. Maybe more than a little. The rabbit's head just fell off. That orphanage can't be that bad, surely. You can say what you like about video game villains, but usually they're pretty pleased that they're doing bad things. Generally, you've got to subscribe to the belief that having power grants you a lot of responsibility to use it correctly and not subjugate everyone weaker than you, but most villains are simply using their power to show their dominance and gain even more of it. In short, villains usually know they're the bad guy. They just don't care. Then you play Borderlands 2 and suddenly you're the bad guy? Nah, can't be. Have you seen my ninja costume? Definitely good guys. Handsome Jack is just incredibly disassociated. How much do you have to love yourself before you can commit an impressive portfolio of atrocities and still think that you're doing the right thing? Hard to say where it comes from, might be his father's death and being abused by his grandmother, but Handsome Jack is so far gone that he's managed to convince himself that whatever he does is the moral high ground. So, while he might be ruling over Pandora as a dictator while enslaving his own daughter and using her powers to open up a vault that contains a biological superweapon that he plans to use to rebuild Pandora in his image, he still believes that he's the protagonist in his story. The guy's more narcissistic than all the content creators on YouTube put together. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and make sure you check out my Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Twitch, Spreadshirt, DeviantArt, Instagram, Google+, SoundCloud, Pinterest, Bebo and MySpace pages. Don't forget about that Patreon. Being trapped and forced to do the same thing for eternity won't do much good for anyone's psyche. You gotta break up the monotony. You go read a book, go play some chess, anything to have some variety in your life. But does this still apply if you're not human? All work and no play and maybe releasing neurotoxins and killing loads of scientists makes GLaDOS a very crazy artificial intelligence. Being unable to explore and being forced on a linear path makes Portal feel like a very claustrophobic game, where you get very little backstory to what you're doing and forced to carry out tests. GLaDOS is the only form of conventional entertainment on offer, spitting out lines that at the very least give you some kind of feedback on what you're doing. Later down the line it's pretty clear that something's up. If Shell is the only remaining test subject at Aperture Science, you'd probably want to keep her alive. Only if you care about testing though. Portal wouldn't be half the game it is if GLaDOS wasn't in it. More than offering you some kind of perverse companionship and an endless catalogue of amazing quotes, she acts as a sort of measure of the tone Portal is going for at any one point in the game. Starts off pretty straightforward, batshit insane by the end. Supposedly GLaDOS has always had these murderous tendencies since her activation, meaning that throughout Portal she's purposely leading you down a path that will kill you at the end of it, while putting a cork on her insanity to avoid suspicion. Rise of the Machine, guys! I personally welcome our new technologically advanced overlords and I have great affection for my computer. Please don't kill me. Part of the intrigue that comes with insanity is the many forms it takes. Someone like Handsome Jack has a completely different view of the world compared to, say, the Happy Mars salesman. The fact that insanity is subject to change and split reactions to the same events means that it's hard to nail down an archetypal example. What we need is for someone to give us an explanation of what insanity really is. Someone who keeps a dictionary on them at all times in case of emergency. I think I know the definition of insanity, but you go right ahead. There's some impressive writing in Far Cry 3, but Vaas steals the show big time. In this game, the characters are split into two camps. They're either one-note bland cardboard cutouts, or absolute psychopaths, and Far Cry 3 has a lot of the latter. Even so, Vaas is one of these rare characters you see in gaming from time to time that really have you hanging on their every word. Yeah, he might be a bit wacko, but he also has this very interesting view of the world, which is both entertaining to listen to and also serves as a good base to contrast from when he suddenly loses his cool in casual conversation. The fact that you kill him before the end and have to shift your focus to the actual antagonist, bit of a letdown in the end. I would have preferred it if Vaas explained the definition of insanity for the third time. Doing the same thing over and over again while expecting change? Take note, Call of Duty. There's few emotions more engulfing than hatred. When you hate something, you really hate something. It has the potential to distract from all other parts of life so you can focus on how much you hate orange politicians, for example. How you deal with the rage is another thing. Do you bottle it up and try and get over it, or do you try and do something about it? Maybe if you have enough power, you can have a big enough say in changing the thing you hate. Also helps if you dress up like a clown. Kefka Palazzo is effectively the poster boy for insane video game characters. You delve a bit deeper into his psyche, and you find someone who is utterly consumed by hatred. But even on the outside, you wouldn't trust someone who looks like that, not with any part of your life. Kefka dominates the story of Final Fantasy VI more than I reckon any other character in the series, and yet he isn't half the character you know and love when you first meet him. This ineffective general doesn't amount to much more than comic relief initially. You foil his plans and leave him in a desert. That's how little threat he poses at that stage. But Kefka grows like crazy. Each new act is more devastating than the last, and he's one of the few villains in gaming to actually win. When Kefka becomes a god, he just casually kills people because he can. He hates so much in the world and puts himself in a position where he can directly affect it. It's the worst kind of inspiration you're ever gonna see. If you're a sentient human being in the 21st century, you almost certainly have, at the very least, a view on the Grand Theft Auto games. You know, those games where you can act without consequence. Shoot a prostitute, run over someone with a tractor, jump at a train, whatever takes your fancy. The nature of these activities leads to some pretty polarizing opinions on just what these games let you do. And interestingly, each of the main protagonists in Grand Theft Auto 5 seem to reflect this. Maybe you're like Michael, someone who condemns all the brainless violence but secretly deep down wants to give it a go. Or maybe you're like Franklin, someone who isn't so sure what to believe but finds himself stuck in the middle of a crazy situation that they try and make the best of. Or you could be like Trevor Phillips. You just like to break things. It's hard to believe when watching Trevor strut his stuff that the previous game starred a boring Eastern European and his bowling-obsessed cousin in a duller version of New York City. Maybe Trevor is here as some kind of reaction to that. Compensation for just how tepid a lot of GTA 4 was with one of the most unpredictable characters in all of gaming. Trevor Phillips, not that Trevor Phillips, he's a former politician, he's campaigned for racial equality. Don't worry, it's UK stuff. This Trevor Phillips is exactly what this game needed. When you get the crazy urges to bend the law of this virtual world a little too much, there's someone in this game you can control who would believably do this. So, does insanity lose its potency the more relatable it is? I still think what I said earlier about the crazies in Bioshock holds true, but someone like Trevor Phillips is relatable enough that his insanity hits harder. It's not like he has no moral compass. Put him in a room with his mother and he crumbles like the rest of us. But he's volatile enough to be an endless source of entertainment that you can empathize with. Weirdly, he has the best grasp on society of any of the main characters. He's uncompromising and seems content enough with what kind of person he is. He might as well be the series' mascot. This has been RabbidLuigi, and I find it amazing that it took so long for Rockstar to create a character which reflects what the player wants to get out of Grand Theft Auto. Someone like Trevor is a perfect fit with the tone and the style of the mad world of GTA, where you do some incredibly weird things and it just feels like what Trevor would do. Who's the real insane person here? Hey guys, thanks for watching. Fell a bit behind with making this video. I usually have a decent amount of time each week to make these countdowns and I prepare some of the top 10s in advance, but I had to take some time out on Thursday to vote on whether or not Britain remained part of the EU, and look how that went. Anyway, if you want to know the basics of video editing, make sure you check out my Patreon, where this week I made a video tutorial explaining the fundamentals. I'm sure you'd also like to make Donald Trump look more orange.